Hello, my name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Okay, so today's video is the first in a series of reviews that I'm doing this September for what I am calling Southern September, wherein I try to read some books from my TBR that are by Southern authors about the American South. And my first entry in this is going to be March, which is a graphic novel by John Lewis, which is essentially an autobiography or a memoir. I believe his co-author is Andrew Iden, and the illustrator is Nate Powell. And, you know, my high-level thoughts on this is that I really loved it. Now, I was totally expecting to love this because it is, you know, National Book Award winner. I mean, like, this has gotten a lot of hype and a lot of praise, but in my opinion, it is really well deserved. So, if you don't know, John Lewis is a U.S. representative from Georgia. I believe he's been a representative since like the 80s, so he's been in Congress for a really long time at this point. But that is not how he kind of came to national prominence. He first came to national prominence as one of the big six civil rights leaders in the early 1960s. And along with people like Dr. Martin Luther King and some others, he really became kind of the voice of the civil rights movement. And I think his kind of most notable moment in that was when he and I believe Hosea Williams led the first unsuccessful march from Selma to Montgomery that ended in a brutal beating of him and all the people there, that became known as Bloody Sunday, and was really kind of a turning point in terms of the passage of the Voting Rights Act, because essentially it was a march that was meant to draw attention to the fact that because of a variety of Jim Crow laws, African Americans had an inordinately hard time trying to register to vote in Alabama and other southern states, and much less actually exercising their right to vote. So I have to tell you, I am so thankful that I read this, because I feel like this is an amazing kind of primer and orientation to the civil rights movement here in the South. And I feel like I learned a lot about some of the leaders whose names I kind of recognized, but I didn't really understand how they fit into the bigger picture. So let me tell you a few things that I just loved learning about in this, and then we can maybe talk about it as a book. And sorry, that box set was getting a little heavy, so I grabbed the third book that is the biggest one out of it to hold up, representing all three of the volumes. So in terms of things that I learned, I really enjoyed kind of understanding more about how the various organizations that were around at the time interacted with each other. So I had heard of like SNCC and the SCLC and the NAACP. I kind of knew those terms, but I didn't quite understand how they all worked together and how they came to being, and what kinds of differences each of those organizations had in terms of sort of goals, leadership styles, perception within the Black community, and that was really helpful for me. So I didn't quite understand SNCC, which is sort of the organization that he helped found, that John Lewis helped found, and I'd say most closely identified with, which I believe stands for the Student Nonviolent Coordination Committee, something like that. Basically, it was students protesting through nonviolence, you know, things. Essentially, they would do like a lot of the sit-ins at lunch counters, things like that, and they sort of pioneered a lot of the techniques that became sort of hallmarks of the civil rights activism of that time. So I really enjoyed kind of understanding what those different organizations were doing, what sort of the goals were, and I think that John Lewis does a really nice job in this narrative presenting different viewpoints within the African American community in terms of what the right approaches were, what the right strategies were, to what degree should the movement be political versus to what degree should it be spiritual, you know, different voices for violence and nonviolence in terms of tactics. Malcolm X shows up quite a bit, especially in the second and third volumes. I think he does a good job of showing places where he really disagreed with Martin Luther King, and where maybe Martin Luther King was playing it too safe, or was you know, maybe looking after his own interests in a way that I didn't feel like was you know, dismissive or anything, but I think what it did is that there is a sort of kind of hagiography that can go along with Martin Luther King at this point. And what I really liked was that he showed that he was not like a perfect leader, not even getting into this sort of personal life stuff, but just in terms of like maybe the way he wanted to do things wasn't always the best, or maybe sometimes it was, but it added layers of complication to figures that I had already kind of read about previously, and I really enjoyed that, and I thought that he did a really nice job of being of presenting people having differences within that community in a way that was interesting and thought-provoking, of like, yeah, you know, like, to what degree, if we take money from this group, are we kind of selling out? Like, questions that I think every sort of like activist or revolution or whatever, they kind of have to face the logistics and sort of disagreement within the movement. So anyway, all that to say, I really appreciated him sort of fleshing out some of those characters and showing how they disagreed and why, without kind of like, I don't think he asked the reader to sort of pick a right and a wrong answer. I think he just sort of lays out the differences, and I really, and he kind of says like why he felt the way he felt at that time, and I really appreciated that. I really loved learning about some new people that I hadn't heard about before. Specifically Diane Nash. I hadn't heard about her before, and I think she was married to a man named Bevel, and they were big organizers that worked a lot with John Lewis, especially in his earlier days. And then I believe her name is Fannie Lou Hamer. They were two women that I had never heard about before, and I was just so excited to read more about them, and I would love to read more about them in the future. It was just fascinating to see kind of how they were responded to as women. He does touch a little bit on gender in this, and I personally would have enjoyed more of that, but you know, that might not just be kind of what his focus for this was. But I really loved reading about those two women in particular, but there were so many kind of people that I met for the first time and would love to read more about in the future. I can't remember his name at this exact moment, but one of the key kind of logistical organizers of the March on Washington, I believe in '63, was gay, and he kind of talks about how there was a lot of discussion in the movement about whether or not he should be allowed to organize because they knew that people were going to use that against him. And you know, just I think that this brought forward some of the people who maybe we didn't hear as much about in school textbooks for specific reasons, like they were women or like they were gay, you know what I mean? So I appreciated that he kind of highlighted some of those people, and like the number of times I teared up in this book was just, I mean, the things people were willing to do to really follow their convictions and do what they thought was right, and that they were essentially, that's the kind of power of nonviolent protest, is that you're willing to completely not resist, but put your body in the way of people perpetrating injustice, if that makes sense. And I just think that that was handled in a really beautiful way in the narrative, and just really inspiring, and really, it made me, I think what this book does, and this is why I think it is and definitely should be taught a lot in high schools, is it made me want to learn more. It made me want to read more about certain people, but just in general about this time period, and sort of, I would love to know more about some of these individuals and some of the kind of dynamics that were happening. Getting into this as a book, I do think that the graphic novel aspect of it works really well in a few key things. I think that it does a great job of capturing the music element of the resistance, of the civil rights resistance movement, because when I think of that era, you know, I immediately, there's a soundtrack in my mind, you know, like I think, ain't gonna let segregation let it turn me around. Like all of those songs, that's like what I hear. And I think that they did a great job. Like they'll, you know, kind of have the main action happening, and then the songs are sort of playing in the background. So I thought that was a really effective way to capture what I think was a really important piece of the movement, which was the music. And I think that's something that really is sort of a hallmark of this. So I liked that they used the visual to kind of capture music happening all the time. I liked how they used all the different dialogue balloons to sort of capture mob scenes where there's just a lot of people saying a lot of different things or a lot of different noises. I thought that was effective, as well as when they were having debates in rooms and people are kind of talking over each other. I thought that that was really effective as well, kind of in this visual, the visual format of a graphic novel. And then finally, I really liked whenever there were kind of speeches, so like Kennedy is giving a speech about civil rights, and it's able to sort of intercut visually on the same page with how John Lewis is hearing that, or the kind of situation, or maybe like a march that's happening at the same time, that kind of a thing. I thought that that was really effective, showing sort of like cutaways almost on the same page in a way that might have been hard to capture in just prose. So yeah, I just thought that the graphic novel you know, I think this is dedicated to the future, to the past and future children of the movement. I think that the graphic novel is meant, the format is meant to appeal to a younger audience and make this topic more accessible. And I think that that was very smart. And again, I think this would be fantastic to be taught in high schools. Like, yes, this should be this should definitely be taught, because I think this is something that's really accessible. But I also think that beyond just that accessibility level of having it as a graphic novel, I think that this just worked. I think that they took advantage of the medium to convey crowd scenes very effectively and to intercut scenes very effectively. So yeah, I thought that as a graphic novel, as a work of literature, this is really compelling, and I think shows what this medium can do that, you know, maybe a screen medium can't quite capture, nor can a purely prose medium capture. I think that this is a great example of why graphic novels are a thing and why they exist. And then finally, just like kind of on a personal note, I didn't realize that John Lewis got his start in Nashville, which is where I now live. The first book and a half basically takes place when he is living in Nashville for the most part, and that's really where I guess I didn't realize how much particularly SNCC got its start in Nashville. A lot of its tactics and a lot of its big leaders, including John Lewis, really pioneered all of that while they were in the city of Nashville. So it's gotten me really excited to kind of, I'm gonna see if I can find a tour, and if I can, I guess I'll just have to like make my own tour, but I really want to go to all the places that they're kind of talking about and see, you know, I don't know what the Woolworth calendar is now, but I would love to see the building where they, you know, did like the sit-in at the Woolworths, or, you know, there's a lot of things that they do, or and churches they go to and stuff in this book that took place in Nashville. And actually, once I was reading it, I remembered that right when I first moved to Nashville, the church that I go to, they were going to do a remembrance walk, going to all of those different places where they were protesting and where they were marching and stuff. So I definitely want to do that next year. I think that would be really, really interesting. But anyway, just on a personal note, I was excited to learn more about that part of the history of the city that I now live in. So anyway, this was a great beginning to Southern September, because I absolutely love this. I highly recommend this to pretty much anyone. You know, this doesn't shy away from some pretty intense scenes in terms of beatings and killings. Like there's some real violence in this, and because it is true to life, this might be a little intense for, you know, super young readers, but honestly, like, this is, especially for American readers, like, this is a part of our history. It's part of our history we really need to make sure we know about and that we're passing on and transmitting. So I would recommend this to pretty much anyone. I really enjoyed it. I would really highly recommend it. And I'm so delighted to have the box set in this nice book, because this is something I think I'll definitely revisit, and something that I'm really glad to have, and something I'm really excited to have read. So 4.5, I think, stars for me. On all three of these, like as a collected work, I would give this a 4.5 star, and awesome way to kick off the month, to be honest with you. So I think that will do it for my review of March by John Lewis. Pretty much telling you to go get it, and a great way to kick off this month of reading some Southern Lit. I'm not sure what I'm gonna read next, but stay tuned. Next Friday there'll be another review up of a different book in this project, so keep your eyes open for that. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below. I think that will do it. Hope you're having a great one, and I will talk to you later. Bye!